Good day and welcome to Learning Thursdays. I am Dave Kruder, the OASAS Learning and Development Unit Manager, and your host for today's presentation. Today's presentation is titled Family Engagement, and today's presenters are Molly Bobeck and Sarah Berlin, both with the Center on Addiction in New York City. Before we get started, a word about Learning Thursdays. Learning Thursdays are offered to behavioral health care professionals as a free learning opportunity with the goal of improving the knowledge and skills of the New York State substance use disorder workforce. We strive to improve the lives of individuals in prevention, treatment, and recovery services. Learning Thursdays is intended to support the professional development of the treatment, prevention, and recovery workforce by offering regular presentations that are relevant to today's behavioral health care professional. As always, if there are any questions, comments, or suggestions, please feel free to contact us at the Learning Thursdays mailbox. You can use the same mailbox to express an interest in providing a future Learning Thursdays program. And now it's time to start the presentation. Welcome, Molly and Sarah.
So my name is Molly Bobeck, and I am a therapist that works with families, here speaking with you from Center on Addiction, and I'm here with my colleague.
Hi, my name is Sarah Berlin, and I'm a family therapist here with my colleague Molly.
And so we're going to talk today about family engagement. It's a topic that we both feel really excited about and strongly about, and we hope that what we have to offer is of value to you all as well. So just thinking a little bit about what we're going to talk about today, we want to talk a little bit first about the realities of engagement, the landscape in which clinicians are working to work with family members of those experiencing SUD and substance use issues. Then we'll talk a little bit about why. What is the function? What's the purpose? Why are we engaging families? What's our conceptual frame? What are our organizing premises upon which we do this work of engaging families? Thinking then about who are we engaging, what are we actually engaging them to do, and then thinking about how, thinking about some concrete strategies that we believe are helpful and actually actionable in terms of working to have families be involved in their loved ones' treatment.
It seems really important to acknowledge that family engagement, though it's something that we're all asked to do, is by no means an easy task. It's challenging in part because of the larger culture in which we blame and shame families who have a family member with a substance use disorder. So how do we understand this as folks working with families impacted by substance use? When our efforts at engagement fail, do we blame the model that we're using? Do we blame the system we work in? Do we blame the family, or do we end up blaming ourselves? And we're wondering together how this understanding about what happens and why it goes the way it goes could be changed by anticipating that family engagement might be a difficult endeavor. And we also wondered how might our experience of engagement, our efforts at it, be impacted by our understanding of this difficulty as a product of the culture of blame and shame, among many other systemic stressors that families navigating SUDs face. Most of us have been directed to engage families. It's a part of the task, it's a part of the treatment protocol, it's a part of the culture of the places that we're working, but very few of us have ever been granted the opportunity to really learn how to do that, which has resulted in making sort of engagement another misattuned measure of our performance as workers. Not to mention how this encourages an orientation to the engagement of families as an obligation we must contend with, a sort of burden, rather than as an opportunity to make our work more effective. And we're not the only ones coming to the relationship pressured. Let's think for a minute about the experience of the families that we are seeing before our very first point of contact. What stigma and judgment have they encountered around the substance abuse in their family? That's the emotional climate, that's the level of vulnerability that we're first meeting families with.
And if we're thinking about it's maybe an uninterrogated assumption that engaging families is good and you should do it, right? As Sarah, you're saying, like, yes, we should, and it's really difficult. We wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about some other assumptions and premises that we're all carrying as we think about this task, think about this belief that it makes sense to engage families. And we're going to talk a little bit together, and we'll invite all of you to sort of think a little bit about some of these assumptions and premises, what ones we identify with, what ones are harder to identify with, not from an orientation that there are some assumptions and premises are bad and others are good. There's a desirable way to think and there's a less desirable way to think. But just because we know that when we're engaging family members, these assumptions and premises are in operation. And if we don't understand how they're in operation, we can't attend to them. We can't notice the evidence that they're impacting the work that we're doing when we're engaging folks. And so if I'm thinking about some of these premises, I'll just read them and then we can talk a little bit about them. This idea, some people don't want help. Parents of youth with SUD are responsible for their child's difficulties. Children of parents with SUD will inevitably struggle with substance use or mental health difficulties. I trust parents of youth with SUD as much as I trust parents of youth without SUD. The best way to help a person who reports difficulty in family relationships is to help them separate and build autonomy. Until an individual with SUD hits rock bottom, there is little anyone can do to help them. I have everything I need in my work setting to support efforts to engage families. I possess all the skills and qualities needed to engage families. And Sarah, when I think about this list, I think about in different times in my work with different clients, couples, families, how I might bump up against some of these beliefs, and different work settings I might bump up against these beliefs. And I guess one of the things that strikes me is that how the first assumption, some people don't want help, and the second to last, or the last rather, I possess all the skills and qualities needed to engage families, bump up against each other. Because I think when I've found myself having a difficult experience engaging someone, how I vacillate between I don't have enough or they don't want what I have to offer. And I think that both of those premises can be really problematic. The extent to which I believe that somebody doesn't want my help, how does that impact how I'm actually reaching out to help them? Believing that perhaps I don't have what they need, how does that also impact the way that I'm engaging with them and how they might be responding to what I believe I have to offer? And so just those connections between those two is just sort of like sitting with me as we're talking about this.
I relate very much to that, Molly, and I think without trying to overcomplicate things, my reaction to the list is that I know what I'm supposed to believe, and I know what premises I'm supposed to not carry. And so I think some of the challenge can be when I'm finding that voice in my head that's saying some families don't want help, or that voice that's doubting whether or not I have what this family needs, how can I recognize that as an assumption or a premise that's at play, and not just recognize it as a thought that I need to get away from and pretend I'm not sort of operating from. I think it's one of the many ways we talk about how engaging families is going to depend, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, in part on engaging ourselves. And that sort of self-interrogation or self-reflection process is a part of how we are able to then show up authentically when we're attempting to build a relationship with family members. Yeah.
And what does it mean when we're having a reaction that I'm not supposed to believe this? Then what happens to that inchoate sense or belief or idea? Particularly if we feel like we are not able to voice that, either to ourselves, to our colleagues, to our supervisors, or even to our clients, to engage in a dialogue, an inquiry for them about what we're noticing and what they're noticing as a result.
Absolutely. We need to feel that we have a certain amount of wiggle room or flexibility, that we can pay attention to the things that are coming up in the room and stay present with it. How does the worry that I'm not thinking the way I should be thinking, or I'm feeling feelings I'm not supposed to be having, take us out of the very relationship we're trying to build and distract us from the work we're trying to do?
Yeah.
So it leaves us with this question: why do all this work challenging fundamental assumptions and premises I've inherited from my time being socialized in this world? Why bother to engage families? And the answer is very simply because it works, right? And there is certainly an evidence base to call on that tells us that there's a greater reduction in substance use, there's increased retention and engagement, and fewer substance use-related problems when we are engaged and connected. But that's not all. It's also because the way we understand substance misuse is that it's relational. And if we hold the premise that the problems that occur in relationship to substance misuse are relational, then it's also a relational context that we're going to go to solve those problems. So why engage families? Because it expands our possibilities, the things, the options and points of entry that are available to us as therapists working to support people with the things that are they're struggling most with in their lives.
And so a few key premises about working with families and those with SUD and treatment that we want to share. We know that a growing body of scientific literature suggests that substance use has distinct effects on different family structures, and different family structures have different effects on SUD. If we're thinking, as you're saying, that this is a relational problem, we know that the extent of the problem, the way the problem manifests, is different based on the kind of relationships. We also know that the relationships have an impact on how the problem emerges as well. We know that different treatment issues emerge based on the age and role in the family of the person who uses substances, and whether small children or adolescents are present. We also want to be really clear that whenever family therapy and individual substance use treatment is taking place concurrently, that communication between clinicians is vital. Again, if we're focusing on relationships and we're focusing on expanding the power that healing has from relationships, that includes between clinicians. We also want to name that empowering the family is a benefit of family therapy that should not be sacrificed. And if there's conflict between goals, say, of engaging family and individual treatment goals, we want to address those issues directly. We want to make sure that no individual needs suffer for the sake of the whole, and we don't want to have the whole suffer for the sake of an individual. And then, just as you were saying, Sarah, part of why we think this is important, not just because it's something that we, personally feel passionate about, and because we believe that that substance misuse is a relational problem. Again, we know that there are certain things that are effective. We know that family engagement increases the effectiveness of treatment broadly, and we also know that their research has things to offer us in terms of what kind of engagement strategies work. For example, thinking about an assessment process in which strengths and needs can be explored and rapport and relationship can be built. An assessment strategy that just focuses on deficits, that just focuses on challenges, is not as effective. We also know things that may or may not be a part of people's daily practice when working with individuals can also be effective when it comes to engaging family members. Things like motivational interviewing skills, setting expectations clearly and in a way that emphasizes relationship, behavioral contracting, and then positive reinforcement all throughout treatment. We also know that, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but that when we're able to make logistical adaptations, when we're able to say, rather than our clients and their family members expected to adapt to our programs, how can we adapt our programs and the delivery of our services with the idea that we're going to make it as accessible as possible. We know that these things aren't easy, or they may not be readily available within the complicated systems in which we all work, but we know that research shows us that it's effective.
I think much like anything else, if we're going to try and do what's hard, we are going to need a ballast of an understanding of why. And so that sort of brings us to the through line of this discussion today, which is fundamentally bringing systemic and relational thinking to our work with families, which would then require us to think about engagement. So we were speaking earlier about substance use disorders as relational problems, and for some of you that may be really intuitive, for some of you that may be a newer idea. We're going to speak a little bit more now about those, the origins of that perspective. And firstly, we're thinking about systems theory, which began in the 1950s with the work of the British anthropologist Gregory Bateson, and reshaped many academic and scientific disciplines, including psychology, where it manifested primarily as family systems theory. And the way family systems theory shapes our work is that it invites us to employ both systemic and relational thinking when we engage families. So what are these? Systemic thinking focuses on the patterns of interaction within a system rather than the individual parts, observing the structure and functioning of relationships, exploring the interconnectedness, understanding the interdependence of the parts within systems and between systems. So that means if we're talking about parts, when we're thinking about families, we're thinking family members, right? Relational thinking allows us or invites us to focus on context, the experiences that occur within relationships, understanding how people experience their interactions with others, both in the past and in the present, and how they incorporate these experiences into whatever premises or beliefs or ideas about themselves and others are operating in any interaction. What systemic and relational thinking give us together is a really useful sort of guide in terms of our working with those whose lives have been impacted by substance use. If we hold from systemic and relational thinking that problems occur within contexts, and so to understand a problem, we have to understand its context, then when we're thinking about families in which there's substance use, we're thinking that substance use is occurring within that family context and the larger context, and we have to understand, in order to understand substance use, in that particular family, we have to understand the context in which it's existing.
And part of how we want to operationalize this systemic relational theory that you're talking about, Sarah, is to invite us all to be in a little bit of a paradigm shift. And maybe that's actually a little bit of a misnomer, like a little bit of a paradigm shift, right? We kind of shift a paradigm or maybe we don't. And I think for our time together today, I think we would want to invite you to entertain maybe going all the way and thinking about a paradigm shift when it comes to families and substance use. And we believe that this shift is an invitation for us as practitioners, as well for the clients and families that we work with. We believe on a fundamental, basic level that our approach, a systemic relational approach, the kinds of engagement strategies that we're going to talk about, gives people a sense of having some company with their problems. You know, a metaphor that we sometimes talk about is somebody sitting before them with a jigsaw puzzle. And maybe folks have had an opportunity, maybe on a vacation where there was limited Wi-Fi, to work together on a jigsaw puzzle with friends or family members. And an experience of having all the pieces before you, some turned upside down, maybe some missing, you're not sure, alone, versus having a team around you. And maybe it's messy because you think you're working on one part and someone else thinks that's their part. Maybe someone has a strategy related to the corners and edges that you don't totally identify with. But there is something about when that goes well, or when that goes as well as possible, given the different perspectives, that feels very different than sitting there with all those pieces yourself. And when we're thinking about treatment, when we're thinking about overcoming a problem as challenging as a substance use issue can be, we want to try to invite that same kind of shift in experience. A couple of the ways that we do that, a couple of the ways that we think that this shift is sort of manifested, is thinking about an individual conceptualization of both problems and solutions, an intrapsychic conceptualization of problems and solutions. There's one person who has to do a few things differently in their one individual personhood towards a systemic conceptualization of problems and solutions. We know that it can be very easy, and a lot of times the way that we talk about families, it's easy maybe to get as far as the systemic conceptualization of problems, right? It can be easy to imagine spreading the blame around. I think the paradigm shift that we're inviting is to take it one step further towards a conceptualization of solutions that are also systemic and relational. We want to think about a shift of thinking about that problems exist exclusively within people. I am a person with my particular problem, to an idea that problems might exist between people, and then between people and larger systems, like you were speaking about. What would it mean if it need not be my problem or your problem, but something that exists between us? That maybe we both have to do something differently so that something might ultimately turn out differently, but neither of us needs to carry the responsibility and blame and shame as you were speaking about earlier. I think part of this paradigm shift that is important to us is thinking about changing roles that maybe people have adopted based on their experiences with larger systems, based on some of the traumatic experiences they might have experienced that result in some rigid and fixed roles. They have a very maybe narrow repertoire for relating to themselves, relating to their family members, to more fluid and flexible roles. What would it mean if people had more options in terms of responding to stress, responding to their loved ones? From thin narratives to thick and complex narratives. You know, we say that complexity brings clarity. And so what does it mean if we're taking a thin story, like this is a person with an SUD, to thickening that and understanding how history is impacting that, understanding how relationships are impacting that, seeing possibilities in relationships versus this is a dysfunctional quote unquote relationship, to a relationship that has some ways that are less adaptive and some opportunities to create more effective ways of relating to one another. And then in terms of that jigsaw puzzle again, from being alone in treatment to being together in treatment, to be doing something challenging and at times, you know, arduous with some company. There's some of this that's complicated, and there's some of it that we imagine, right, to be kind of simple. What does it mean to be facing a problem with someone alongside you? And if we were to think about how we take some of the systemic thinking that Sarah introduced to us and thinking about what that paradigm shift might look like, we're thinking about this goal here, you know, to aid families in delineating and understanding the types of problematic interactions that occur and have occurred, and to co-construct with them a new reality, one in which interactions are changed so that the system works more effectively at meeting each member's needs.
So as we were saying earlier, that in making that jump to systemic and relational thinking, we first have to sort of carry ourselves across that paradigm shift, not imagine that the families are already there waiting for us, but imagine we're going to get there together. So who are we engaging? Firstly, we're engaging our multiple selves. We'll speak a little bit more about what we mean by that, but we're beginning with ourselves, and then from there, we are engaging parents, we are engaging adolescents, potentially partners or spouses or teen or adult children or siblings in the home.
You know, one of the anecdotes I like to think about when we're trying to answer this question, who are we engaging, I'm reminded of, and some of the research that we do at Center on Addiction, we invite clinicians to fill out some self-reports of their sessions with teen clients that they have. And then they're also meant to fill out the composition of the session, like who came. And we have teen, we have parent, and then we have other. You know, it's kind of these like broad categories for who might participate. And some clinicians were putting themselves down as other, which was not necessarily what we intended when we created the questionnaire, right? We used that to capture sibling or grandparent or probation officer. But what I really liked about that conceptualization is that when we're thinking about who is in the room in a therapeutic encounter, it's so clear. If you're imagining that you need to list yourself, you're already invested in the idea that it's the teen, it's the parent, it's who I am that's in the mix there when I'm thinking about the engagement that needs to happen.
I love that when we think about who is in the room and it's me. This brings us to our next point, which is how we are engaging ourselves. So if I'm in the room, it's perhaps important to remember that there's many different parts of me that are in the room. That's what we're calling a multi-dimensional self. If we hold for a moment that the many selves and identities that we are carrying presently and historically, that it's very easy to see that we are not singular beings. So think about this personally. I'm a mother and I'm a daughter. I'm a woman and I'm a white woman. I'm a cisgender woman. I'm an able-bodied person. I'm a therapist and I'm a therapy client. I'm a teacher and I'm a learner. I'm a child of immigrants. I'm an American-born citizen. Every one of those has a very specific aspect of lived experience that's come along with it. Every one of those is present with me in any relationship I'm in. And certainly when I'm sitting with a family, I'm sitting in the room and it's the part of myself that's a therapist, but it's not up to me what other parts of myself may be in the room at any given moment. So the very least I can do is develop a sort of keen attention to which parts of me might be active in any moment, which parts my curiosity with a family are coming from, when my fed upness and my failed efforts to engage are kicking in. Is that a part of me that's accustomed to having the road rise to meet me because of various social privileges I've been afforded? When I feel a sense of defeat, is it a part of me that's known challenges I haven't been able to overcome? Those are all lived aspects of my experience, partly related to, if not significantly located to social, connected to my social locations. And each of them are present with me in any given circumstance. As Audre Lorde says, we don't lead single issue lives, but rather we're shaped by many different issues and through the messages we have received through all of those aspects of identity. So as a therapist, what's my philosophy? What position am I assuming? Who do I see myself in relationship to a family? Am I an expert? Am I a facilitator? Am I a nurturer? Am I a supporter? Am I an advocate? Am I a representative of a system or an institution? There's both how I see myself and then how the family is seeing me. Do I understand myself to be a resource or a support, or do I see myself as an extension of a way of managing the behavior of another person? And how alert am I to that position I'm holding in relationship to a family at any given moment? When we ask that question of ourselves, who am I to this family, who am I to the clients that I'm seeing, comes to mind for me is the work of Ken Hardy, a family therapist, who's asked us to consider in any given moment with a family, am I functioning as a helper, a healer, or a jailer? And I would go as far as to say that some aspects of ourselves are maybe more available to do play any one of those roles. Mm-hmm. How can I be aware enough of those that I can pick? Mm-hmm.
You know, as you're speaking, I'm reminded of the exploration of assumptions and premises that we engaged in a moment ago. Mm-hmm. And this invitation to understand that we have these multiple identities in operation when we're working with our clients is the same as as a type of invitation that is somewhat similar to the one to interrogate the assumptions and biases that we're carrying. Because just like with the assumptions and premises, we're aware of the beliefs we should be having or carrying, we also have an awareness that how we should be engaging is purely as a professional. Mm. And that's the only thing in operation. When I'm finding myself feeling aggrieved by a client, or even when I'm finding myself happy and joyful with a client based on some success in their experience, how am I giving myself permission to be aware that it's the multiple identities I have outside of the professional one that are in operation, in both that experience of grief and in that experience of joy?
I think the awareness, too, of those various aspects of ourselves and how they might be at play in any relationship isn't a departure from the work we're doing with families. Yeah. If we're supporting family members to think about themselves in that kind of complex, holistic way, it would be shortchanging the process and potentially losing out on a ton of points of entry to change if I cut myself out of that process. And I think we would run the risk of replicating a kind of misattunement, right? How you see me and why is a big part of the conversation between family members. I'm a part of that too. You're seeing me different ways for different reasons, and the same is true in the other direction. Yeah.
I mean, one other piece about this that I want to say, I think, we invite us all to think about ourselves as not neutral when we're thinking about working systemically and relationally. Imagining that we are some blank canvas upon which family members project all sorts of ways of seeing and doing and believing, but in fact, multi-partial, right? Mm-hmm. Building alliances with everyone present in our work. Mm-hmm. And if we're thinking about our multiple selves, how is, say, the part of me that is a daughter and the part of me that is not a mother in operation as I'm finding myself able to build an alliance with one member of family and finding myself struggling to engage another?
I was thinking about that earlier, how when I'm with my children, they have a really hard time remembering that I'm somebody's daughter. With my mother, she has a really hard time remembering I'm somebody else's mother. And it's so similar in the work with families, right? So if I'm holding, let's say I'm bumping up against that assumption that some people don't want help. Mm. If I stay with that assumption for a moment, instead of reject it because I know I'm not supposed to think that way as a mental health professional, if I hug it for a minute, try and understand it a little bit better, why would I imagine that this person might not want help from me? Mm. What might I represent, just both in terms of my visible identities or different ways I've presented myself? And also, what might they need to know or be reassured about in terms of where our conversation could go, what kinds of experiences I'm alert to that might not be my own? How might that help them make use of me? Yeah. Because if they don't imagine that I'm useful and I don't jump right to the other assumption you talked about earlier, which is there's a good reason for that, then there's a dialogue about what gets in the way of them being able to imagine that I have something to offer. And that in and of itself is engagement.
Yeah. Yeah. And so in thinking about, how we manifest some of these beliefs, we want to talk a little bit about like some of the specific populations that maybe we're working with when we're thinking about engaging family members in SUD treatment. One of the things we know is that engaging parents might be the most common form of family engagement. A young adult in treatment and thinking about involving their family, which very commonly is their parents. One of the things we want to name at the outset is we know that shame and blame that many parents feel contributes to difficulties we might have in engaging them. We know that it's different than just engaging that parent in their own individual treatment, right? It's a different task than engaging a youth alone in treatment, and if that parent were to come to us with a complaint or presenting problem for individual treatment. And just by way of an example, when a youth reports feeling depressed and isolated, no matter how difficult they may describe their relationship with their parent to be, when we successfully engage that parent in treatment, a message is sent to both of them. We can be the voice that reminds the parent how valuable they are and how much they have to offer, and the parent's participation reminds the teen that they want to be there for them despite what has become so difficult. And so when we're thinking about some of these engagement efforts, we'll talk before we end about how the engagement sets the stage for other types of interventions, changes in behavior, changes in meaning. But I think we can name at the outset that categorically having people step for one moment in our office together is a form of treatment because it's affirming a message that people are in it together.
So some of the people that are in it are the adolescents, and we've got to engage them. One technique that's been developed by the Center on Addiction is the concept of adolescent goal collaboration. When we think about this is different from just sort of joining in general, building relationship and building trust. Engaging adolescents in family therapy is actually about transforming that adolescent's individual goal into a family-oriented or specific goal. So in a case like that, I want more freedom, something we commonly hear from an adolescent, becomes our family needs to trust one another more. So example, when we engage a youth for family therapy, we're inviting them to think very differently and specifically about their own challenges and resources. A youth that may already be at the edge of their comfort zone, talking with a therapist about what's hard for them, can imagine that family therapy might be harder still. While we often imagine the goals to be transcendent, systemic change, that's the concept we're coming into the room with. A family therapy goal that can be enticing to youth may be as simple as a slightly negotiated curfew, sharing one small aspect of their experience or expressing one piece of curiosity towards the caregiver. If we stay with that collaborative goal setting, then we're not imposing what we imagine freedom looks like. The teen is going to tell us what it is that they're looking for, and it may be simply to be heard around one small matter. It's somewhat different than adolescent engagement and individual therapy because we have the opportunity to shift the conversation and to share the goal and share the effort at change.
And I think, as I'm listening to that small example that you named around, like I want more freedom becomes our family needs to trust each other more. No matter what happens in terms of who ultimately comes in the room, how much family members participate, even us holding that frame, we hear an assertion of an individual goal, even within ourselves, and then perhaps even offering it back, transforming an individual goal towards a systemic, relational family goal is categorically working towards some of these ideas we've talked about, no matter what happens.
I mean, if we think about that as therapists, one of our primary tools is a question. In the way we language our questions, we are communicating our point of view, right? So when I hear you say, can you tell me how your family might be sharing some responsibility for growing that sense of freedom? What might you all need to be able to have greater access to that? Just those questions in response to a statement like, I want freedom, invite people to share some responsibility for the sense of constraint.
And invites a sense of hope for family members. Because if we believe that something could shift, again, it's sort of like assessment as treatment, we're sending a message that things can change. We believe that things can change.
I think where that feels so uniquely and specifically essential for us to consider in terms of engaging adolescents is what low-hanging fruit the power struggle is,
Yeah.
right? The adolescent is coming into almost any room prepared, right, to jostle a little bit for power. And just by coming to it with the assumption that we are going to be working on this together already says you don't just have to share blame for the problem. You're also going to have company in the solution. There's no power struggle in that. That is the assumption that we're all needed in terms of facing this a little differently.
And then oftentimes with adults in treatment, we're thinking about engaging their families, we're thinking about engaging their partner or spouse. One feature I also want to name about this particular relationship is that another feature of that systemic paradigm shift we were talking about is a moving away from binary thinking and imagining there's one identified patient and then there's their partner or spouse. Somebody has a problem and somebody doesn't. And so particularly when we're thinking about working with two adults, we want to think about how to engage both members of the couple with a sense of curiosity about the relationship, about what's hard for them as individuals, and about what they might need differently from the other person. Continuing to move away from a frame that they are somehow participating in their spouse's treatment versus the client in that context. In every situation we've been talking about, but just noting it here, is the relationship between them. By way of example, a partner whose only relationship to their loved one's substance use is to share upset or blame can be invited to expand the ways they relate to their loved one. What's underneath this current, very thin narrative of anger and shame and blame? In addition to them changing the way, for example, they might be able to communicate around substance use, they can be invited to share in the success and celebration that effective treatment can create. If we imagine that, again, inviting people to be part of the solution, if folks experience success, how can family engagement represent success for more than just one person?
It's such, again, we're back to that paradigm shift, right? Where if I'm thinking about only the person in front of me and their struggle with substances, and that person happens to be a parent, it might be helpful for us to think about engaging the teen or the adult child. Do you mind changing that?
Oh, yes.
Thank you. So when a parent is misusing substances, a child has a very specific experience, or an adult child has had a very specific experience related to their sense of survival and hope for their own future. So by way of example, we can think about how many teens or adult children can imagine that being involved in the substance use disorder treatment of their parent would be an extension of a dynamic that leaves them feeling overly responsible for their parent's well-being. Treatment can be a corrective experience, if we think about it differently, in which the therapist can support the adult child in sharing what is true for them without being responsible for the feelings that their authenticity creates. And the therapist can support the parent in tolerating the difficult feelings their child has towards them and their history without imagining that what is coming at them is, again, that blame and shame that we've all been acculturated to associate with substance use.
And the last kind of constellation that we'll talk about is thinking about engaging a sibling in an individual's treatment. One of the things that sometimes we talk about in our work around family engagement, I think especially when we feel nervous or feel confused, we think about sometimes going smaller, right? And I think when we think about sometimes, again, that puzzle analogy, how can we go bigger? I think we believe that siblings can play a key role in engagement with the whole system. And how can we imagine that if there's something that's jammed up, say, between a young adult or teen and their parents, how might a sibling be the way through? Because they're actually the person, maybe besides us, that's invested in everybody in the situation. Also, I think in the context of SUD experiences, siblings that are not identified as having a problem may feel unimportant, disengaged, uncared for. And I think the kind of family therapy that we're talking about, the kind of family engagement that we're talking about, we hope that it can create a context in which all members of the family matter, all have strengths and resiliencies that can be capitalized on, and all have the opportunity to make individual changes that can benefit the collective whole.
So we've been talking a lot about engaging families, engaging ourselves, but we haven't been yet speaking about exactly what it is we're engaging families to do. So besides sit with us, inside an office, outside an office, wherever it is that we can actually get ourselves together under whatever circumstances it takes to get us there, We're talking about engaging families to participate in addressing the problem. Coming back to the puzzle analogy, 1,000 pieces is a lot to look at alone. If we are thinking about engaging families to help us address that, we are looking at keeping company. And again, we're thinking about remembering that relational frame that we talked about before, how essential it is to locate our solutions in relationship. If we think about the struggles that we have are occurring in relationship, then the labor of love, of getting through them, is also carried together.
And one thing that we want to name is that, Sarah spoke a moment ago about like systemic transcendent change. That's obviously something that we're really excited about and invested in. But we also want to be really clear that there is a continuum, there's a spectrum of ways that family members can be involved in treatment. On the one end, there is some psychoeducation about substance use and treatment approach. Maybe there's a book you recommend. Maybe there's a brochure. Maybe there's some information about symptoms that many people in early treatment experience, for example. And then if we're moving along that continuum in terms of deeper engagement, more psycho-emotional investment, maybe the next way to be engaged might be being briefed by an individual therapist or clinician on the individual who is in treatment, progress and risks in treatment. That would be the equivalent of, like a monthly or quarterly meeting with somebody's individual therapist, or periodic phone calls, just updating you on how things are going with your son's treatment. And then kind of moving along that continuum, we're aware that there are ways that people can be coached sort of on how ways to respond to the individual. Maybe they're also being coached in some self-care. We know that craft is an evidence-based modality, moving along that continuum in terms of supporting individuals and more than just being briefed, right? But imagining, okay, there's some different things that you could play around with, some different techniques you could try that might have a different outcome than what you've been doing. And then this last piece here, family treatment, focus on collective change. That end of the continuum in which, again, the client is the family. It's not the individual person presenting with a substance use issue. And we know that effective engagement doesn't always have to look one way. And we know that family members can be invited to participate anywhere along the continuum. There's certainly, we believe, value anywhere along that continuum. And that folks can move also up and down this spectrum, depending on their needs and what's happening. And for me, I think the value in thinking about this continuum certainly helps us move away from a frame that we have to imagine that there's only one goal, right? If we believe in this, doesn't mean that we're failing if all we're getting is that phone call at the current juncture. And I think it also offers us like close to infinite possibilities, right? In terms of how we might be able to think about engaging folks.
I think it's a little bit different from the take what I can get idea, that over here is the desired goal and I'll take whatever I can get along the way because it's of some value. And it comes back to thinking systemically and thinking relationally, believing in the inherent strengths and resilience of a family is that my role to them is in part going to be determined by them. And so the role to which they are going to be engaged in the treatment with me is also going to be in part determined by them. And that is in fact, in and of itself, sort of empowering, right? Rather than holding them to a measure. If they really cared, they'd be here. Is not going to get us there.
Empowering for everybody, us and them.
Right. So, Molly, we have talked about why to engage families. We have talked about who and in what kind of constellation we'd engage them. You've even spoken a little bit just now about what different forms engagement might take. How do we engage families?
And so, and just thinking about some concrete techniques that we believe are valuable, we want to name, for example, by way of an initial phone conversation. Definitely, yes, as you're saying, Sarah, let's move away from a frame in which let's take what we can get. But by that same, and that same token, how can we maximize the opportunities we have? And I think this initial phone conversation, there are some ideas about how to best support that phone conversation being as effective as possible in terms of the goal of engagement. We want to build an alliance by talking about the salience of somebody's involvement, caregiver or family member. And again, when we're thinking about salience of involvement, it's not moving the blame around. It's salient, it's important that they be involved because they have something to offer towards solutions. I think that right away, that idea that I think family members are primed to be told that they're part of the problem. They may already feel that way. Other providers may have communicated that to them in the past. And so how can we right away in that first phone contact send a message that they can be involved towards solutions? We can also build relationship and establish that alliance by a frame of curiosity. A huge part of this systemic relational frame has to do with us embodying a not knowing stance, collaborating, and by being curious, by also asking questions we don't know the answer to. And so how can we transmit that sense of curiosity even over the phone by asking them questions about their family, what their family likes, what's been happening, how are things going, with a sincere curiosity. If the person that we're speaking with, we believe we have some alliance with, how can we encourage them to recruit others into treatment? Siblings, spouse, other people. How can we try to have whoever we might be speaking with help us build a bridge to folks that we may not be speaking with, other members of the family or family of choice, and how can we talk a little bit about how we might be able to adapt the program for their needs, whatever kind of flexibility we might have. How can we problem solve what might be getting in the way of them coming in? How can we track what's happening in terms of our engagement efforts and what's going on with the individual's treatment?
So Molly, once you've got them onto the telephone and you've had a productive call and there's the possibility they will be in the office with you, are there some things you might speak to about strategies to use then?
Certainly, and I think obviously some of the same ideas apply, right? A stance of curiosity, a stance towards problem solving, solution generating, a stance towards alliance building, relationship building being kind of like the primary effort. We can think about one goal even of that first meeting is to create an experience that somebody might want to repeat, to put them in a place where they might imagine returning. One of the things that we want to do in that first initial meeting is clarifying role, who we are, what's happening in the agency, folks they might have met, folks their loved one that might be an individual treatment may have met, the options that are available to them, providing education to them as a consumer as well as a client. We want to set a foundation for a collaborative working relationship. One of the ways that we can do that is by even talking about ourselves in the way that, Sarah, you talked about a little bit at the beginning. How can we, even in our first meeting, be clear that we understand that we're in this room as people and as professionals? How can we identify practical issues that might need to be addressed immediately? If transportation and caregiving, like babysitting, is an option that's going to represent an obstacle to folks coming back, how can we sort that through with folks? And how can we develop an ongoing plan to address current or participation barriers that might emerge over time? And so if we're thinking about some more specific techniques, some more of the how, we're going to talk about some items that have emerged in some of our work at Center on Addiction from a framework of trying to empirically distill the core elements of family therapy from several evidence-based family therapy models. So some of the techniques we're going to talk about now emerge from that process of they're disaggregated from a model but represent evidence-based family therapy techniques. And when we're thinking about specifically related to parents, we're thinking about parent collaboration, love and commitment, and then thinking about parent ecosystem.
Again, we want to start with an acknowledgement that there can at times be barriers to engagement. And specifically with parents, we want to think about what research has taught us, which is that there is a lot that gets in the way of family members attending treatment. Family members can report that these issues are interfering with them attending. And again, we know that these barriers are both logistical and relational. When we think about engagement expansively, we do understand it to be more than attendance. Behavior is what you do once you're in session or in contact with a provider. Attitude is your beliefs and feelings about the experience, how hopeful or cautious you are. And alliance is your sense of a working relationship with the provider. When we're curious about a client's engagement or what might be getting in the way of it, it's valuable to think about all three of these constructs. So when we are thinking about some of the barriers to parental engagement, it's no news to anybody that there are a lot of demands on people's time, and that often when we're looking at doing the hard thing, it's very easy to see how there are very real conflicts with schedule, how costs can be high, and how, as you were saying earlier, Molly, we might have a lack of childcare, or there may be a transportation issue. Again, we can think about these as logistical matters that need to be considered, but we can also think about even the process of engaging in a conversation about those logistical barriers is in and of itself building a relationship and engaging. We can think about how our program is, the approach that our program is using, the providers and the program context, everything that we are sort of sharing in terms of the setting. And we can think, as I just was saying earlier, that engagement is more than attendance. It's behavior, attitude, and alliance.
I also just want to add that I think it can be a really helpful inquiry for us as we're thinking about, it feels like there's a difficult engagement experience, not experiencing effectiveness when it comes to my engagement efforts. Even trying to ask myself the question and get some help in answering, are these logistical barriers, or are these somehow relational between the program, myself, within the family, without the family? And I think even asking that question, even if we can't say for sure, even if we know that typically, right, it's neither either or but some synthesis, even asking that question, I think, can be helpful to us. When we imagine that it's all logistical, are we too dismissive of how relationships could shift to make it possible? And we imagine it's all relational, how are we not understanding the realities of people's lives?
Mm-hmm. Striking that balance is of crucial importance. Mm-hmm.
And so when thinking about the first of the three parent engagement items that we're going to talk about, we're thinking about this idea about parental collaboration. We've been talking a lot about a collaborative stance. And part of the aim of this item is to generate some hope about the future and the child's future, and certainly about the treatment. We think that hope is a powerful force, and to be invited to hope is not to be invited to change one's mind, but to have a different orientation. Ken Hardy, who you spoke about earlier, invites us to be in the hope manufacturing business as family therapists. And I think when we're thinking about this technique, we're certainly firmly sort of in that role, or in that at camp. And one of the ways that we imagine that us as providers can collaborate with parents, again, is thinking about how we can help them, support them in feeling more hopeful about the therapy, that this therapy has something to offer them too, that this therapy is not going to be a place in which narratives that are problem saturated and shame and blame filled are going to be reinforced. For their own capacity as a parent, that we believe that they are the medicine, so to speak, that their young person might need, and that we believe their youth can overcome challenges. Sometimes one of the metaphors that I use with parents is thinking about adolescence, specifically, or young adulthood, as skiing down in the slalom formation in which they have to weave in and out without crashing into the red flags. And the task is to get them to the bottom of the mountain. Those red flags are going to be there no matter what's happened. It's a very intense time in our lives. And how can we hold the hope that they're going to get to that bottom of that mountain safely? And then we also collaborate with parents very concretely in terms of involving them in treatment goals. None of us would want to participate in a process in which we don't have a say about what the goals are. And so how can we invite parents to think about goals that are adolescent-centered, the things that they might be most worried or concerned about related to their young person, maybe specifically parent-centered, ideas around which they might be able to get some support and some strategies, parental practices, or family-centered, changes in relationships in and outside the family. What are some systemic goals that are neither teen nor parent, but collective?
I can offer one of the several examples that are here is that when we have the opportunity to respond to a family by saying, the parents by saying, I agree, the fact that your daughter doesn't talk to you at all is worrisome. Can we make that the first order of business, finding out what keeps her from talking to you and trying to change that? So again, we're leading with our curiosity, engaging the parents in not a child-centered or teen-centered and not a parent-centered goal, but in a change that the relationship would make.
Another technique for engaging parents in treatment is thinking about love and commitment. And this technique focuses on behaviors that access a parent's feelings of love, caring, and commitment towards the adolescent. You know, when families are in crisis, these feelings are often hidden or forgotten by the parent, or they feel inaccessible or hard to see for the teen, maybe even for us as a therapist. We believe that some semblance of parental love and attachment is present even in the most extreme of circumstances. And maybe folks have a reaction to that. Maybe folks have had experiences in which they truly did not see that there was a connection between this parent and the young person. And I think what we would want to offer is to lean into a lens in which, even if it's so far sublimated, based off of trauma, based off of experiences of oppression, based off of a history of perceived failures, how far underground is that seed? However far it is, you know, this technique is an invitation to try to water it. And one of the ways that we feel like we can enhance these parental feelings of love and commitment, if we imagine it's a seed that we want to grow, is two different ways. You know, one way is sort of from a nostalgic frame, remembering past or current feelings of love, joy, satisfaction, accomplishment, aspiration, pride on the parent's part, between the parent and the teen. You know, we imagine that, again, we're fishing for these slivers of feeling or experience that are exceptions to the current difficult circumstances. We believe that there are exceptions to how difficult things are now. We can ask, when this person, this teen that is now raging against you, that you maybe don't sometimes even recognize, when they were a small baby, you know, what was it like between the two of you? We can also kind of cultivate some aspirations. What kind of parent do you want to be for your teen in the future? What kind of relationship do you want to have with them when they have their own children? And so if the current moment feels so hard to bear, how can we enhance this experience of feeling attached and connected by looking towards the past or looking towards the future?
The therapist that's nurturing access to the experience of love and commitment might say something like, let me ask you, when your son was younger and things were going more smoothly, like all parents, you had things that you hoped for and still do for him, and worries that you had for him. Could you talk a little bit about that? Again, just creating that space where they get to access their experience of parenting outside of the struggle and the worry and the challenge of the substance use.
What I like about that example, that idea about like all parents, when a parent is struggling, when their teen is in crisis, they might somehow be imagining that they've stepped outside of a kind of a quote unquote like normal family situation, but reminding them that they are like every parent that loves their kid and had hopes. And even in asking that question, again, are we sending a message? We know that just like every parent, you love your child.
I just want to say one thing about that, because in that moment, you're not just helping the parent to re-engage with a part of themselves as parent or re-engage in terms of the relationship with their child. You're also, again, if we just come back to it, promoting the relationship between you and the parent, because you're allowing them to see a reflection of themselves in your eyes that is much more tolerable than one that, again, blames or shames. Yeah.
So the last parent engagement item that we'll talk a little bit about is parent ecosystem. You know, you talked about Bateson, the anthropologist that developed systems theory. Part of that systems theory is an ecological view. And we really feel that this ecological view is essential for building empathy and making connections with parents. A lot of us that are specifically drawn to work with young people that might have an affinity for young people, it can be very easy when we're bonded with them to wish that they are getting more from their parent than they are, to be aligned with the youth and feel grief and anger that their parent wasn't there for them in the way that they wanted them to be, the way that we want them to be. And I think one of the ways that we overcome that hurdle of feeling confused or alienated by the way a parent is currently, to our view, relating to their youth is by zooming out a little bit and thinking about the parent in their multiple contexts, with their multiple identities and set of lived experiences. one of the ways that we can consider that is thinking about, for example, their own family of origin and how they might have been parented, what their adolescent might be like. We also understand that parents are often under great stress from multiple sources. Well, maybe we can say broadly, without any caveats, that parents are under great stress. They're not often under great stress. Parenting is stressful and a challenging task. And how can we acknowledge that this person is more than just a parent with a teen or a young adult that's having a hard time? They have their own individual problems. They have their own set of disappointments, desires, hopes, dreams for themselves, separate from just being a parent. And part of that is thinking about this non-judgmental stance. I think that doesn't categorically mean that we imagine that somehow we're without judgment, but how are we aware of that judgment? I don't really like sports, but I will say that how can we imagine that rather than a referee with a whistle calling foul, as we're witnessing a parent and a teen relate to one another, how are we like the most loving and supportive coach, just a step behind them, cheering them on and believing in their capacity to give themselves and their teen what they need.
So if I was a therapist that was able to situate a parent in a larger ecology, I might say something like, would it be helpful if we spent some time exploring ways you can manage your anger separate from just with your daughter? It's clear to me how much pressure you're under as a parent and also as a spouse, as a daughter yourself, and at your job, and I'd like to hear more about that.
And so we spoke about this a little bit before, but if we're imagining that there is a frame in which we're collaborating actively with parent, we want to think about how we're collaborating with the adolescent and young adult as well. We want to think about how those goals can be family-oriented, and we also know that we want to generate some buy-in from them, particularly if they're the identified patient or in this context that they are. And how can we transform their unique concerns into things that can be actionable for all of us together?
If I'm a therapist engaging an adolescent in goal collaboration, I might say something like, you don't look so thrilled about being down here at the clinic. I wouldn't be surprised if you'd rather be doing something else right now. I'm going to work really hard so that this becomes a place where you feel comfortable, where your sort of side of the story is heard, and where you can talk about and work toward changing things in a way that makes you feel better.
Mm-hmm. And so in that way, there's those different levels of collaboration as well, right? Because it's thinking about how, again, the relationship exists between them and the people in their lives, and then us and the setting in which we're working with them. And so when we're thinking about all of these engagement efforts, right? We were talking about we've been talking about that puzzle. We've been thinking about assessment as treatment, that when we engage effectively, we are already making our point of view clear about how problems emerge, and more importantly, how solutions can emerge. But we also know that we're setting a stage for what's to follow. That if we are effective in using some of these techniques, that we're creating a setting, we're bringing people together then to have a more effective relational treatment. And some of the byproducts that we believe are part of this engagement process that we've been talking about, we'll talk about now for a moment. One thing that feels really clear to us is that a byproduct of this process is that logistical barriers can become problems to solve rather than reasons for inaction or lack of participation. We don't mean to imagine that all logistical problems can be solved, but rather than stopping with, I'm very busy, how can that be something that we can be flexible around because we've worked through whatever barriers might be currently present. We also believe that when we engage parents, we empower them, not blame them. And as we've been saying, we think that kind of shift can be transformational for families, for individuals, particularly if they are coming into the relationship with us with a history of feeling blamed. And for those of us that have been blamed in certain situations, we know how different that feels from a sense of being empowered. It's categorically like the polar opposite types of emotional experiences. We believe that engagement is resuscitating desire for help and activating instincts. Part of the premises, as we've been talking about, is that if there are instincts or experiences or desire for help that are currently not available for us, how is our task in excavating them, resuscitating them, because we believe that they're there. We also think, one of the byproducts of this engagement process is shifting affect that might originally present to us as frustration, anger, abdication, indifference, to what we fundamentally believe is underneath, which is worry, concern, and love.
I'm thinking that there's one more I want to add there to our bullet list, is that by engaging families, I also increase my own sense of efficacy and agency in relationship to the work that I'm doing. We talk about being in the hope manufacturing business. We're bringing a certain amount of that to the work. It gets co-created with the family, but when that session is done or that treatment is done, I get to carry that with me too and have that incredible gift of being present with others in the process of change. And if we come back to, again, that why do we engage families, part of why any of us are doing any of this work to begin with, hopefully has to do with the fact that it is nourishing to us in some way to participate in a change process and a healing process.
And how does that become a recursive process with ripple effects in our lives, with our multiple identities, and the next family we see or the next couple we see?
Yeah.
So thanks for listening. My name's Molly Bobeck.
And I'm Sarah Burland.
We really appreciate you taking the time to hear what we have to say about family engagement. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions or want to be in dialogue about any of the ideas we talked about. And we look forward to your feedback.
Thanks so much.
I'd like to thank our presenters for today's program. I hope you will all find it useful while assisting clients in need of services. Your feedback is important to us. It helps us to know if we are meeting your educational goals and expectations. Once you have viewed the presentation in its entirety and completed the quiz, please follow directions to access the SurveyMonkey website and take a moment to complete the evaluation. Once again, thank you for joining us and keep up the good work. Please contact Learning Thursday for any further questions or suggestions.